All right, so let's summarize. We start with secretary technique because most kids hate writing who can't read. They despise it. It's an argument and a problem. I have found, well, you'll see in the start too, I had no trouble getting this kid to work with me in writing, absolutely none. But I started with the secretary technique. And I taught him COPS. Once we did the secretary technique, it was not an issue. And I would be spending a couple more days, then I'd give them to a sentence, then 2 sentences. So we start with getting the gist. Somebody did something. If we can do because, that's fine. But we get them getting a basic summary. And I've covered that the first course. Then, once we get that going, we had a where and when phrase. And he went to the store at night during the storm. He went swimming in the ocean at 7 in the morning. So we add those phrases. Then we add a descriptive word to talk about the subject and a descriptive word to talk about the verb. They're called adjectives, adverbs. I don't even use that. I just say, give me a good descriptive word to describe this thing. Okay. The beautiful girl, the ugly dog, the smart man, the smart girl, the sharp, whatever. And now let's add an ly word to the verbs. Swam quickly. Okay. So we got descriptive words, casing. By the way, your ly word should be as close to the verb as possible. Don't separate your ly words from the verbs. That's a general principle. So keep them close. So you now got your who or what, you got a descriptive word, and you got phrases. You now could write a good sentence. See you later. If we've got a 60-hour course, that may be as far as we get, 60, 80, with a kid who can't write much, 80 sessions. We may be able to get them to write a good summary, doing maybe 3 of those or 4. Then that's good sentences. You got adjectives, you got adverbs, you got a subject predicate, you got your phrases. Okay. So that gives us a sequence. From there, we move to the idea of a paragraph where you have a main idea, and it's not an essay where you're supporting a point. You have a main idea and you're given a description of the story. It's more of a summary. They had fun in New Jersey. They did this, they did this, they did this. So it's not an essay, but it does start with the main idea. And we're now talking about when you have 2 sentences, okay? Who or what did something, another who or what did something, that you can connect them with a comma and an and, but, or, nor, or for. You can connect them. That gives you more creative stuff, okay? So we start talking about that. If this one hangs, okay, hangs here, we can't do the and, but, or, nor, or for. You will need a comma to bring it. So if I go, although he was a nice guy, that can't stand alone. I'm going to need a comma there, okay? Now that's getting a little complex. So to keep it easy, it's this. If you want to get creative with your sentences, you can take the prep phrase, the where phrase or when, and put it in front. To the car. The man ran as quickly as he could. To the car is a phrase. You can need a comma after it. It started at the beginning, and you've now made a more interesting sentence. Late at night. It can't stand alone, so there'll be a comma after it. Late at night, they walked to the beach. So we're starting to bring these where and when phrases to the front. That's just to give you a little more interesting sentences rather than he went to the store, he got some bread, he got milk. That's boring. He went to the store, but he ran into a lot of problems. It's getting a little more interesting. Then when you start with a prep phrase, you're getting even more interesting. So we're varying our sentences a little to accent time. Now that's more advanced. I worked with a kid who really actually was getting to be a good writer. And we'd play with all kinds of, now that we had these options, we would play with all these kind of different options. Like, all right, we have a compound sentence. Is this one talking a lot about this one? If it is, it's a semicolon. Tom's a nice guy. He's respected by everyone. Well, the second part is so closely defining the first part, we can put a semicolon there. He went out in the woods and was attacked by bears. Well, the second part is so close to the first part that we can put a semicolon and go, he went to the forest, he was attacked by bears, with a semicolon. So we now are getting interesting sentences with compound and semicolon. Let's pause right there, because in English books, they make it very complex and they call them subordinate clause, independent clause, adverbial clauses, all that kind of thing. I'm trying to keep it simple. Questions before we move on that? Does it make sense? Easiest way is just think our first creativity is moving the prep phrase up front. By the way, what's the simplest way of thinking of a prepositional phrase? The very simplest way. What a squirrel can do to a tree.
Oh, I was going to say a ball in a box.
Ball in a box too, in the tree, up the tree, below the tree, in front of the tree, what a squirrel can do to a tree. That's your prep phrase. Up the tree, down the tree, below the tree. Just get creative, but it's what a squirrel can do to a tree. That's a prep phrase. So you can have a when prep phrase and a where, what a squirrel does to a tree. So you just move one of those up front, you now got a more interesting sentence. You have to put a comma when you do that. Now, interesting enough, there's controversy of whether or not you should put a comma in a compound sentence that's two sentences joined with and, but, are, nor, for. I'm going with Strutt and White, who are the revered source in colleges, The Elements of Style. And also the Warner's book that was used in English for years in schools also used the comma before the conjunction. And I'm going with those, I think it's Warriner, W-A-R-R-I-N-E-R-S. And those are my two sources. But I think we're on safe ground going with Strutt and White. They are revered and used in a lot of college courses for writing. But I was struck to find that there's a bit of controversy on that. By the way, a good writer can do anything he damn well pleases. Like, what's his name? Paulson breaks a lot of rules. So I'd be talking to my buddy about it as we're writing. I say, he's breaking all the rules, but he allows you to too. Did you find it, George?
I swore I had it on my bookshelf right there, but it's on my bookshelf at my home office in my home.
Is it a yellow book?
No, my Strunk book is like a
white.
Black. Yeah,
it's white
black.
or black.
Yeah, black. Yeah.
It's the Bible.
Yeah,
I think we're in good shape. That was my reference. Okay. And there's a lot of other variations you can use. You can do a positives in the middle. You know, positive is another name for the subject, right? So if I do teach that, that's not a big deal. But if I do, I just say it positively identifies the noun. So Tom, a nice guy, positive. You need commas around it. It positively identifies the noun. That's all a positive does. You have to put commas there. Judy, comma, very smart student. A positive positively identifies the noun. By the way, the only reason I know all this stuff is because I wrote books. And I had to refer to Elements of Style a lot. Plus I had a guy who was my editor who was really good at grammar, and he'd help me. Okay, so I've got a kid who can write descriptive sentences. He can put a descriptive word in front of the noun, descriptive word after the verb, and a where when phrase. That's a good sentence, right? He can move that prep phrase, what a squirrel can do to a tree, in front of the sentence and put a comma there, which is kind of cool. He can combine two sentences, which is kind of cool. So we're getting a kid who's starting to get creative. This is upper level. So this might be a start 4 kid you get, where you might go in writing pretty quickly with a start 4 kid, okay? He now can write a main idea, which is the gist. Somebody did something because. When you think of the gist, think of main idea. That's really what it is. Pep Baker was trying to solve the mystery of attacking agents because they were hurting him. That's the main idea of that whole book, is the gist. And then the full gist is now getting into the climax and conclusion, which were the effects were, the problems were, and the solution was. That's the full gist. The effects were, the problems were, and the solution is the full gist. So we begin with the basic gist, which usually comes out in the first couple pages. And then you're going to add the effects, the problems, and the solution as you go through it. You basically have dealt with the elements of fiction if you do that. Because the elements of fiction is really a conflict, which is the problem, a series of rising actions. You got a place, a climax, and a conclusion. Your gist statement, your full gist is getting at that. So if I can do a kid at the end of the story, say, okay, well, Pep Baker went to his science class because he's studying science. And he studied quantum mechanics, and the effects were, he started to realize that the mind at an unconscious level controls light, can control whether something is seen as a particle or a wave, depending on what you're looking for. And because of that, he's starting to think that maybe that's what's going on with his mind causing all this trouble. His mind is creating this world that he doesn't have control of yet. See, if somebody can do that, they're getting a good grasp of the sentence. So let's review that. Somebody, what's the next? Did
something
next.
to someone
Because that's the main idea. Somebody did something because. Full gist, the effects were, there's effects, right? Cause effect. Then there's problems that occur. And there's a solution, hopefully. Unless you're Rod Sterling or Rod Serling. Rod Serling had open endings with no solution in Twilight Zone. I don't know if he had what's called open endings where there wasn't a solution. You just had to guess. Well, I hope this happened, you know. So, by the way, I got this when I went to a course on high school comprehension. And they were talking about the kind of thinking we want our high school kids to do. And the more, they were kind of separating these as different thinking events. As I looked at them, I thought, oh no, wait a minute, they're a package. They're what I want my kid to do. I want him to go, somebody somewhere did something because the effects were, the problems were, the solution is. I want them always thinking that way. Somebody did something because the effects were, the problems were, solutions. Okay. All right. So when I'm first doing writing, if I have a higher writer, I might have them write out a gist or the full gist. That again, I will tend to use gist with summary, the two terms. I'll use them interchangeably because, or with main idea, I'm sorry. I'll use the word gist for main idea. That's because main idea can be iffy. Like, what is the main idea? Is the main idea that things are attacking Pep? Is the main idea that Pep could get hurt? Is the main idea that this is happening? Well, if I stick to this theory, somebody did something because, I'm going to get the main idea. I just am. Tramp took Lady to a restaurant because he was in love with her and he wanted to woo her. That's the whole thing. Lady and the Tramp.
Isn't that also the summary?
The summary would be as I move into the effects, the problems, and the solution.
I thought
That's
you added that in. Sorry.
What that is, Randy, this is the coup I think I pulled together. See, I was trying to take the idea of elements of fiction, introductory, rising action, climax, conclusion. All stories follow that. Introduction, rising action, around a conflict. I call it the wave, some call it the roller coaster. Okay, I was trying to do that. Well, what the gist statement does, it pulls that together into one easy statement. Somebody, okay, Harrison Ford, did something. He was trying to find this relic because it was very expensive and very important civilization. And he taught Western civilization and archaeology. The effects were he ran into Nazi killers who were crazy. The problem was he had to get by these Nazi killers to find this. And the solution was the Nazi killers self-destructed and he was able to get this. That's a nice package of the movie. So that's when I decided we were on the right ticket, when I was able to go through movies and do that and go like, really, that is kind of the whole gig. Okay. So the gist is getting that kid to be thinking main idea. And that's kind of where I want in his first paragraph writing. He gives me a main idea and then he gives me a little summary. Okay. Now that we're moving to the essay, we're raising the ante a bit. Okay. So let's go to my screenshot. Whoops. Well, I'll go ahead and start with creative writing. What the heck? Now, creative writing, I draw a wave or a roller coaster. I call it the wave because somebody had already coined the term roller coaster and I didn't want to violate copyright. But you basically have the who, where, when, what. Who, Sally Jones, where at the beach, Rehoboth Beach, when, 2020, what's going on, she's there with her parents. You have a conflict, person versus person, person versus creature, person versus what used to be man versus whatever, but it's now changed to person. Okay. You have your conflict here. And then the action, the steps, the rising action rotate around the conflict. See? Then you have the climax, the top of the hill, where the problem's resolved. Then you have the falling action and conclusion. Okay. Does that make sense? Now let me put it into my gist statement. Somebody did something because here's the conflict. The effects were these things. The problems were these things. The conclusions are the solution is here. And then the falling action is tying things up. So that sentence kind of covers this whole thing. All right. So in writing a story, by the way, this is how I wrote my stories. Actually, probably shouldn't share this, but you guys, it's a small group. So I wrote a couple of French Quarter Phantom in a bar in New Orleans. See, it was based in New Orleans. So, and I took photos of the sites and sent them to my sister who did all the drawings. So I was taking photos and I would go into a bar and I'd lay down 4 napkins. And those 4 napkins would look just like this. See these 4 boxes? So I'd have napkin 1, 2, 3, 4. In the middle, I'd have a little napkin for the conflict. And then I'd start, well, first I'd have to brainstorm words that fit the story. So in other words, I couldn't use ostentatious if I'm writing, French. So I had to first brainstorm all the words that are going to fit in that chapter. Then once I got the brainstorm, I would start fitting them into where they go here in the story. All right, what's my introduction? We'd write it here, who, the, where, the what, okay? What's my rising action? What are the points of rising action? What's the climax where the problem's solved? And then the conclusion, and then the conflict. So that's how I wrote my stories. One way I wrote them. Another way I wrote them was what some writers do, is I wrote and edited while writing. So my writing actually led me to ideas that just sitting there thinking didn't lead me to. Does that make sense? So some writers write that way. They just start writing and edit as they write. So there was some stories I wrote like that, but almost the entire Moonlight I wrote this way because they were pretty involved, the Moonlight Tales. I think Chronicles I did this way too. But it's really just a good way to tell a story. So you brainstorm. By the way, when I did this with kids, I'd only have them write a keyword or 2. Not a lot of nonsense, just a keyword 2. Tom and Susie, what? Dealing with Phantom, when? It's summer, where? New Orleans. First thing, car. Second thing, Phantom. Third thing, statue. Fourth thing, Halloween. Fifth thing. And then we put it here. So I would get keywords I'd write here and the conflict, what's against what. And now I have my story. Now, in elementary class, each one of these is a paragraph. So you have a 4-paragraph story. Or if you're at first grade, each one of these is a sentence or 2, a couple sentences, and you have a big 1-paragraph story for first grade. But as you move into a novel, these become multiple paragraphs, right? So I'll have several paragraphs on the introduction. And it's at LA Raptor that I realized how to introduce my story with a conflict to grab the kids and bring in this after I got the conflict going. LA Raptor, if you remember, they're attacked and the raptor grabs this guy and runs out to the woods and the police. It's all wild. I realized that if I could start with the conflict, I could get the kids more engaged. That was something I came to terms with there. So this is a good structure. So when you are doing that, you're going to take the wave and talk about the elements of fiction. See, all the wave is the elements of fiction, which is taught in every literature class in the world. All stories pretty much will have introduction, rising action, climax, conclusion. Now, some of them will vary. Spielberg will have introduction, rising action, rising action, rising action, rising action, rising action, rising action, conclusion, rising action, conclusion. That's why he's so great. So writers vary, but it's pretty much this formula. And this is the formula I used. Does that make sense? So now the kids are brainstorming, they're writing the keyword. Okay. Now you can, of course, go to magazines and cut out pictures and put them in the boxes and make it more hands-on if they want a creative writing story. For creative writing, it's good to start with just pictures. Getting the kids to choose a picture they want to write about, because description is easier than coming up and forming new ideas for sensing type students. So you have intuitive kids and sensors. The sensors, a picture can really help them. The picture might show a sailboat coming to an island and a lot of people getting off, and they've got the basis for their story, and they can just start getting creative with that picture. Whereas intuitives often will just get creative and basically join ideas. So there's different types of writers. But anyway, picture writing is, for a kid who's blocked writer, there's two ways you break it: secretary technique and picture writing. Those are the two ways you break it. And I can say that after years of teaching. I can't remember a kid yet that I haven't had some success with using those two techniques, because they're so common sense. Like the secretary technique is so common sense. George, you're having a little trouble here. Let me give you a hand. Go ahead and tell me that first sentence. Great. How about the second? Why don't you do one more sentence, George? I'll check back with you in 5 minutes. Then I rotate around the class. 5 minutes, I'll come. What a start. You've got the subject. You got to. I'm going to finish the rest for you. See, the secretary technique is the kid can't help but be successful. That's why it's so powerful. Same with picture writing. Okay. So these are aspects of the writing process. Now, once we start the writing process, once we have this, we start bringing in better sentences with descriptive words, where, when phrases. We then do some compound sentences, and we start bringing in the sentence structure once we've got this going. Questions? Cool. I picked up an idea from Nancy Atwell, who is just this incredible teacher. Oops, I can't move this. I'll have to go get that later. She'd have the kids start by doing a life map. And it'd go from, like, if you're up to 12, at age 3, anything good or bad that happened. And you'd go up to 5 positive, 5 negative. So like I hit by a car at age 3, all right. So that's a -3. And then, you went to the Disneyland. That might be and you do a little life map. And then your first story is a personal narrative from your life map. Now, again, I'm getting in the writing in general now. Keep in mind, we might have 5 minutes if I have a start too. All I want is a good summary with a couple sentences and a couple descriptive words, and I'm good to go. But when you start to do more and more writing, you're going to go ahead and develop more of these techniques. All right. Now the essay is pretty straightforward. So the hamburger is a topic sentence. And a topic sentence, when you're talking about an essay, is something that should start a fight or an argument. Just to give kids something to grab a hold of, something that'll start a fight or an argument. It's the difference between an essay and the summary, where you're given a main idea, is you're not trying to establish any point of view with the first kind of paragraph. Here you're trying to take a point of view, such as school should be only go till 12 o'clock and it should be over in May. Something that would start an argument or a fight. So you have your topic sentence and your initial is just 3 supports. Now, again, with my kid that I worked with this, I had him put one word for the topic sentence and a word for each support. And we went to dictation software. His problem is he could never remember what he was going to say. Just having the word here took care of that problem. So San Francisco was the word. San Francisco is a great city to live. First support, he had sports. It has great sports teams. Second, it has really interesting restaurants. Third thing, it has a wonderful nightlife. Conclusion, if you want to have an exciting life, move to San Francisco. Now that is a basic essay. Okay? Now the Whopper is just one step up where we have 2 backups here. But if you write a good Whopper, you're actually well on your way to a good 5-paragraph essay if you write a good Whopper. See, a Whopper has 2 backups, whereas the 5-paragraph will have 4 backups, and each one is a paragraph. That's the only difference. So once you can do a Whopper, you're really ready to knock out a 5-paragraph. So he will say, San Francisco is a great city to live. 1, it has good sports teams. Basketball team is incredible. The Warriors, they're in the playoffs again this year, and the Giants have won the World Series multiple times. They have great restaurants. North Beach has fine Italian food, and Chinatown has great Chinese food, and there's great places to go at night in North Beach. There's old jazz club that goes back to the 40s called the Saloon. There's also other clubs that are very good in that area. San Francisco is a great place to live. Okay, so notice that the only difference between these 2 is the backups. So I have him put a keyword for each of these, just one keyword. He can do more than that, but all he needed was the keywords. See, what would happen is I thought he had a short-term memory problem, but his problem is he's so creative in his thought, by the time he'd put down what he was going to write about, he changed his thought about it. So putting the keyword helped keep his thought. Now, so notice that the hamburger is just easily developed into the Whopper burger. In fact, with this kid, we spent a week or 2 on just writing a paragraph. Then we spent a week here, and then we were writing Whopper burgers with the backup. So the triple windy burger, it's three burgers now. So now you have your introduction that introduces a bing, a bang, and a bongo. San Francisco's a great city to live. It's kind of like it's your hamburger, your first paragraph. San Francisco's a great city to live in. It has wonderful restaurants, which is your bing, great sport teams, your bang, and great nightlife is your bongo, and that's your intro. Then you have this supporting point and 4 backups. Then a new paragraph, this support and 4 backups, this support, 4 backups, and a conclusion. And it just comes very easily right out of the hamburger. So you go from the hamburger into the Whopper, and from there into the 5-paragraph. So this would be a kid who's a start 5, who needs work on writing and so reading. So you might be reading Pep Baker, and he might be writing first a Whopper burger about it, and then a 5-paragraph.
At what age would you consider not being able to do this, needing intervention, or what grade level?
Well, often it's introduced, I think, too early, like 4th, 5th. I think it should be taught in junior high, myself, middle school, like 7th. The Whopper burger, I think, needs to be developed in 4th, 5th. The basic essay, I'm more creative writing the basic essay 1, 2, 3, and then summary paragraphs. This is just my off the cuff. But you know, I would just kind of check what schools are. Everything's being moved up in schools, by the way. I don't know if you noticed, but they just keep going earlier and earlier and earlier. but I don't even, do kids have that many opinions on anything? I mean, really? When you're doing a Whopper burger, you're actually doing a research paper, you know? When you're doing a triple Whopper, you're actually doing a research paper. And, you know, because you're basically making an opinion and you're giving supports with all these 4 supports each. Conclusion. So it's 5 paragraphs. Intro, bing, bang, bongo, conclusion. The conclusion can just review the bing, bang, bongo, boring, or you can make a case for changing their idea and try to bring some sort of case that it doesn't just summarize the bing, bang, bongo, you know.
In my writing program, they have to pick the most something. And so they're forced to insert their opinion. I kind of like that.
I do too.
He says that's the difference between an essay and a report. You know, that conclusion.
I like to start with a quote centered above the introduction. It can be a quote from the story, or it can be a quote from a famous person that gets across my view. I also like to start with a little narrative story that gets across the point I'm making in my essay. So a little narrative that could be from this book or could be from another book, but it's a little narrative. And then there's a third way. What's the third way? So I like the quote. I like the narrative.
The question.
Question. That's it. It's a question. I like to start with a question. To be or not to be, that is the question. Got it, you know, and then we go into 3 points of that. Yeah, those are the 3 things I use to kind of center that. Thank you, Jen.
I kind of like figurative language sometimes too.
Yeah.
A little bit harder though.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, Jen, I think I've told you WordWall. WordWall, if you go to figurative language, has wonderful activities for metaphor, simile, idioms, onomatopoeia, just great games. And my kid picked it up no time at all, figurative language. And they're just fun games. So, well, anyway, and then we have our conclusion.